Hello, my name is Andrea Byrne and I'm 42 years old. I've spent nearly a quarter of my life trying to conceive. I'm a newsreader and I wish I had an auto cue today. I'm also a podcaster. I have a podcast called Making Babies, which is all about trying to normalise the fertility conversation. So let me ask you a couple of questions to get us started. What do you think about when I say the word fertility? Well, sex, maybe, babies, possibly, pregnancy, perhaps. What do you think about when I say the word infertility? Let me run you through some quotes just to get you started. So, about 8 years ago, I found out I was unable to have children. It pretty much changed my life, to be honest. The whole process was heartbreaking. You go into IVF all positive, and then it doesn't work, and you end up feeling depressed. And the last one. I really struggle going to christenings and to weddings, and I am trying to get better, though. Who are you imagining? What are you imagining when I was going through those emotions, those words? Well, if you were imagining a woman, then you would probably be in the majority. But you would be wrong. In fact, all of those clips were said by a man on an episode of my podcast. And what I want to talk to you about today is fertility's forgotten sex. I started by saying to you that I'd spent a quarter of my life trying to conceive. Well, actually, that should have been my husband and I have spent about a decade of our lives trying to start a family, because this is a journey that a man and a woman go on together, and it can be very individual and really complex. And I think we all talk about this banner of, oh, they're doing IVF or we're having to have IVF, but we don't talk much about the complexities behind that. So I wanted to map that a little bit onto my personal journey for you to begin with. So we got married and we wanted to try to start a family, and we had lots of tests eventually because things just weren't happening. And I was told that I had a chronically thin womb lining. So what does that mean? I didn't know at the time. So when the sperm and the egg meet to create that all-important embryo, which is needed to implant somewhere, to embed somewhere, to develop a pregnancy, well, if the lining of the womb isn't thick enough, there's nowhere for that to happen. So I was told that it was improbable, if not impossible, that I would be able to carry my own children. And what ensued was years of fertility treatment, a barrage of fertility treatment to try and desperately change that. So I had multiple operations. I had an MRI scan on my brain, would you believe it, to see if I had a benign tumour, which was somehow affecting my hormone production. There were loads of different drugs protocols, thousands upon thousands of injections, I think, over time in all sorts of parts of my body. And as part of that, I was even prescribed female Viagra, would you believe it? It is a thing, and I can assure you it isn't pleasurable, but that's something that they do prescribe in some fertility treatments these days. So we had multiple failed and cancelled cycles of assisted reproduction treatments. And also within that, sadly, we had 2 miscarriages. So we lost 2 pregnancies. And you're constantly playing this game of what if throughout the time that you're trying to conceive. What if I can get to that goal? What if we can start creating a family and get that long-awaited child? And for a lot of people, you just feel totally out of control, not knowing what the answer to that is going to be throughout that time. Now, for us, we did have a very fortunate, wondrous ending. And this is she, Jemima, aged 2.5, and she is an utter joy, and she is quite miraculous because in the end, in fact, she was conceived naturally. Now, I don't tell you all this out of any sense of victimhood or sympathy. It's to just try to normalise the conversation and individualise the complexities of that journey that so many couples go through. Because it is normal. Let's have a look at the figures. It's 1 in 6 heterosexual couples in the UK that has trouble conceiving at any one time. It's 3.5 million people. And I'm going to talk about the heterosexual side of things today because that's my lived experience. But of course, there's lots of other ways of shaping families which all come with their own challenges. But just look at those figures, 3.5 million people. So it is likely to be someone you know or someone you love or perhaps even you. And let's look at another figure within that now, which is very specific to what I want to raise awareness of today. And that's that of all those couples trying to conceive, 50% of the time, so that's half the time, it won't be anything anything to do with the woman's body or the woman's reproductive system. It will be a male factor, so it will be to do with the man's sperm and be to do with sperm health. So it's really important that we raise awareness of that. But it might be a surprise to you that it's 50-50, because actually the issues around fertility in our society very much remain female ones. And maybe that is because physically, with biology, it is a woman who has to try and get pregnant and carry a baby, so the treatment falls very much onto her. But at least I guess that means there is a conversation around it. It's certainly not loud enough, it's certainly not positive enough, but it is happening. For men, it seems that that conversation is very much well and truly turned down. The volume is turned down, it's barely a whisper, it's hardly there. And this is something we really, really need to change, to remember fertility's forgotten sex for two really big reasons that I want to talk about today. And the first of all, that is to do with the physical side of things, with sperm health, sperm count, sperm quality. We don't talk about it enough. And also the mental health side of things. Suicide rates are rising amongst men. Mental health is a real issue. It's a taboo subject again, and we don't talk about that. So let's start with the first one. Let's start with sperm health. Now, I think we have lots of cliches around fertility, don't we? And one of the things we hear about a lot in that chatter is things like, oh, her biological clock is ticking, oh, time's running out, my body's getting old, I'm running out of eggs, all of these things around the female side of the conversation. But actually, sperm ages as well, and it's a bit of a myth that men can carry on impregnating women and fertilizing eggs maybe well into their 90s. Sperm ages and sperm count and quality can vary throughout the adult life as it gets produced. And it's all got to do with the count, the number of sperm per milliliter of semen. And once that starts to drop, that can be really worrying when it goes below 40 million, but also the motility and the morphology of the sperm. So that's the ease and speed at which it moves, to throw a bit of science in there, and also the size and shape of the sperm. So it can get to that all-important egg quickly enough to do its job. So what can we do about all of this? It could be pretty serious. There's a study that was done over 40 years, which reported back a few years ago, and it said that sperm count has fallen in the last 40 years by more than 50%, and it was going down by 1.4% every year. So if you sort of throw forward another 40 or 50 years, then you think, oh goodness, we could be in serious trouble with this. And there was a book that accompanied that study. The lady who was integral in that study was a lady called Professor Shana Swan from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York. And there were lots of headlines that came with the attention around that book, which was recently published. Things like Spermageddon, and it was all got to do with how external factors in our environment might be affecting our fertility. So pesticides, chemicals, all these things which exist around us, but we might not really be able to control. And it's really important science, and it's something that's all being looked at the moment. But actually, there is also science which goes back decades, which scientists agree on, which is perhaps more personal to us, which we can control. Simple lifestyle factors, which we can grasp a hold of and make big changes in a small amount of time when it comes to fertility. So basic things like making sure we keep a check of our weight, making sure that we don't smoke if we're trying to conceive, cutting alcohol, and things like anabolic steroids, which are really dangerous, particularly in men who might be into their training and need to think about their fertility as well. And there's also stuff which we think are kind of urban myths which are always talked about. So keeping the nether regions cool. So if you're in a job where you work in a hot place like a chef at an oven all day, or you've got your laptop on your lap all day, you need to make sure you take breaks to make sure that everything's kept cool, and don't wear tight underwear. Yes, that is really a thing. And I know you're probably thinking, well, women can do all these things too, in terms of the general health stuff, the weights, the not drinking, all of that kind of thing. And yes, that's really true. But actually, men do have more power over their fertility because men keep reproducing sperm throughout their adult life on a cycle, whereas women have their eggs determined right from when they are born. The number of eggs they have are determined right from when they are born. So maybe if we just talked a little bit more about it, then we'd all be more aware. Maybe we can get to the point where having a fertility check is just as normal a conversation as going to the dentist. To look after our teeth for the future is really important for our life. To look after our fertility for the future could be, if you want a family, really important for your life. So maybe we're not at the point just yet, if we raise some more awareness, where we're going to have to harvest a load of healthy sperm and send it to the moon to protect the human race. Maybe it's just about talking a bit more. And talking is what I want to do a bit more, talking about with you today. Now, we know, don't we, that yes, there's the physical side of things, but there's also the mental health side of things. And that's the other thing I want to raise today about why it's so important to remember fertility's forgotten sex. It's about the mental health. We know that 12 men in the UK ends their life every day. And we also know that men just don't talk as much, and suicide is on the rise in men under the age of 45. And that's just the sort of time that all these problems might be starting to happen around fertility as well. And it might be 2 years before a man discloses a problem to their loved ones or those close to them. A study was done a few years ago with the Mental Health Foundation, and it found that women might talk about things within maybe 2 or 3 months with people close to them, but men would wait years and maybe never disclose it. So this is all really crucial. And I can map it all onto my own personal journey because my husband Lee very much fits this picture. He didn't want to tell anyone about what was going on in our lives with our fertility, but it was really important in the end that he did share and he got some professional help, because after all, in life, not only do we have this fertility journey going on and we might be having to cope with all of those things, but also life throws lots of other crap at you. So you've got 2 parallel things happening. And we had parental bereavements. We had a family member with cancer. We had Lee being retired from his job playing professional sport. And his best friend died in a car crash. So he was dealing with an awful lot all in one time. So it was really important that he did get the help that he needed. But I think the breakthrough really came when he communicated in a different way. You remember the podcast that I spoke about at the beginning? And you remember the quotes which I spoke about? Well, they were from a man called Kevin Button, also known as the Man Cave on social media, who is one of the few people who is starting that chatter on social media and that support for men and men around fertility. And I was recording a podcast with him, and I said to my husband, wouldn't it be really great if you jumped on and spoke to him? And he was really reluctant, but I managed to persuade him, and I went out the room. And when I listened to that conversation back, he revealed some things in a different way, really. A different way from how he'd ever really spoken to me about it. He said just how hard it had been, probably the hardest thing in his life, he told Kevin. He also said to Kevin that he had found that he developed this paranoia about, was it a problem with him, even though I had had this medical diagnosis, maybe it was still something he'd done and he couldn't get that out of his head. And he also spoke, and this was probably one of the most distressing ones for me to hear, that he got really upset when I used to say to him, oh, do you know what, let's just split up and go our separate ways, and you go and find someone who can have a baby with you more easily and sort all of this out. So it was really interesting to know that at that point in his life, he found some empathy, somebody to have a conversation with on a level, in a way that they'd been on the journey in the same way as him, and they perceived things in a similar way to him, and he really opened up. So it was the power of men talking to men. Now, just before I conclude and wrap up, I just want to talk to you about one other analogy which I think maps onto this quite well. You know, when you're on an aeroplane and in that safety briefing on the aeroplane, I know we don't do much flying around anymore at the moment, but you remember it, you're told to put your own oxygen mask on before you help your children. Well, that can be the same with men and women in fertility. Women go through all these really harsh problems with the physical side of the treatment which they're having to cope with. And who did they turn to? Who did I turn to when I was going through my treatment? Well, I turned to Lee, and people turn to their husbands, their boyfriends, their partners. So a man needs to find a way of being equipped with his oxygen mask and breathing and surviving through that journey to be able to help his wife, his partner, to do the same and breathe and survive through that journey. It's a really tough journey, as I've said, for everybody to go on. And we need to remember that it's normal. Let's just return to those figures for one more second. It's 1 in 6 heterosexual couples in the UK has trouble conceiving. So let's normalize the conversation around conceiving and infertility and fertility because it is normal. The problems around fertility are 50-50. So let's make the awareness 50-50. Let's make the conversation 50-50. And let's make that support 50-50. Because maybe, just maybe, by opening up that all-important dialogue for everyone, we can find a way to remember fertility's forgotten sex. Thank you.